The Galactic Council had a problem. Well, they had several problems. But the biggest one was currently slouched in a folding chair outside the sacred trial chamber, eating what appeared to be charred animal flesh and humming something called Sweet Caroline, while completely ignoring the reverent atmosphere that had taken the council 3 millennia to perfect. Marcus Chen was not what anyone had expected when Earth finally made contact with the wider galaxy. The council had been prepared for primitives with barely functional space travel, not a mechanical engineer from Detroit who looked at their most sacred trials and asked if they had Wi-Fi passwords and whether the vending machines took Earth credit cards. High Arbiter Zelthok of the Infinite Wisdom Consortium adjusted his ceremonial robes with 4 of his 6 arms, while his other 2 held the sacred scroll of trials that have never been completed. The scroll was getting heavier each year, much like his growing sense that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Human Marcus, Zelthok intoned in his most official voice, the one that usually made lesser species prostrate themselves in fear. You understand that the fire trial has claimed the lives of over 47 species' greatest champions? Marcus looked up from his portable camping grill where he was flipping what he called burgers, but which the assembled dignitaries of 17 different species could only describe as compressed flesh circles of questionable origin. A thin wisp of smoke curled up from his cooking, and several of the more sensitive species had already fainted from the aroma. Yeah, that's what you keep telling me, Marcus replied, taking a swig from a can that hissed when opened and made the crystalline entities of Proxima b recoil in horror. But nobody's explained why that's supposed to scare me. I mean, my cousin Jimmy tried to barbecue on a gas grill during a thunderstorm last 4th of July. Now that was dangerous. The council exchanged looks. Well, the ones with eyes did. The others exchanged whatever they had that passed for meaningful glances. The hive mind of Kepler 452b sent out a pulse of confusion that roughly translated to, "Are we sure this is their best representative?" Ambassador Quirith of the Melodious Tentacle People cleared his throat analog, which sounded like a dying whale gargling mouthwash. Human Marcus, perhaps you do not comprehend the significance. The fire trial requires a being to survive in a chamber heated to temperatures that would vaporize most organic matter. The chamber reaches 800 degrees Celsius. Marcus paused mid-bite of his burger and blinked. So like almost twice as hot as my pizza oven back home? Zelthok felt what humans might call a migraine coming on, which was impressive considering his species communicated through bioluminescent forehead displays rather than actual brains. Pizza oven? Yeah, wood-fired brick oven I built in my backyard. Gets up to about 900 Fahrenheit, which is... Marcus paused to do the math. About 480 Celsius. Great for Neapolitan-style pizza, though I admit the crust gets a little smoky. The silence that followed was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments when entire civilizations realized they might have made a terrible mistake. It was the silence of beings who had spent centuries building up the mystique of an impossible trial, only to meet someone who considered it slightly less challenging than weekend cooking. Dr. Vex Hala of the Empirical Research Division, whose species had evolved from what humans would recognize as extremely anxious librarians, consulted her quantum tablet with shaking pseudopods. But the flame itself. Pure plasma fire that burns with the intensity of a star's corona. Oh, neat, Marcus said, genuinely interested. Plasma torch? Yeah, I use one of those at work for cutting steel. Though I gotta say, if you're trying to make it star hot, you probably want to adjust your gas mixture. I brought my equipment if you want me to take a look. At this point, Supreme Chancellor Vorgak of the intimidating name convention decided to intervene. He was a being whose species had conquered half the galaxy through sheer force of sounding threatening, though he was beginning to suspect that psychological warfare was less effective on humans than previously assumed. "Silence!" he roared, which caused 3 moons to briefly shift orbit and made every sentient being within 50 parsecs feel vaguely uncomfortable. "You will face the trial, human. Enter the chamber and meet your doom with dignity." Marcus finished his burger, wiped his hands on a napkin that he then properly disposed of in a small trash bag he'd brought along, because Marcus was raised right, and stood up. "Okay, sure. But can I bring some stuff with me?" The council looked at each other again. The sacred rules of the fire trial, which were carved into a monument the size of a small asteroid, didn't technically forbid bringing equipment, mainly because no one in the history of the galaxy had ever been stupid enough to ask. What kind of stuff?" Zelthok asked, dreading the answer. Marcus gestured to a collection of items he'd laid out on a tarp next to his chair. "Well, I brought my work coveralls, obviously. Fire-resistant. Got some of those silver proximity suits from the foundry back home. Couple of portable fans for air circulation, some meat for smoking, because honestly, 800 degrees Celsius sounds perfect for a good brisket. Oh, and some lantern wire and bulbs, because if I'm going to be in there for a while, might as well have good lighting." The assembled dignitaries stared at what they now realized was not random junk, but rather a carefully curated collection of items specifically chosen for surviving and, apparently, enjoying high-temperature environments. Admiral Kickstar of the Void Navy, whose species had evolved in the cold, vacuum of space and considered room temperature to be apocalyptically hot, whispered to his aide, "Did he say he brought meat to smoke?" "I believe so, sir. While inside a trial that's supposed to kill him." "That appears to be his intention. Yes, sir?" Admiral Kickstar made a note in his personal log. "Recommend immediate defensive alliance with humans. These beings are clearly insane in the most useful possible way." Marcus had started suiting up, pulling on what looked like a silver spacesuit, but which bore the cheerful logo Detroit Fire Department, Hazmat Division. As he worked, he kept up a running commentary that was equal parts educational and terrifying. "See, the trick with high-heat environments isn't just about insulation," he explained while adjusting his breathing apparatus. "You need to think about airflow, heat dissipation, and thermal management. Plus, you want to stay hydrated." He held up what appeared to be a sports drink. "Got electrolytes." Zelthok felt his bioluminescent forehead begin to strobe rapidly, which in his species indicated either deep philosophical contemplation or an impending nervous breakdown. "Human, Marcus, I must ask, does your species often voluntarily enter environments that would kill most life forms?" Marcus paused in his preparations and gave this serious thought. "Well, yeah. I mean, my brother-in-law's a deep-sea welder. My sister works in a steel mill. My nephew's training to be a firefighter. My neighbor does volcano research. Oh, and my mom runs a competitive chili cook-off circuit." "Competitive chili?" "Yeah, some of those peppers can hit 2 million Scoville units. Last year's winner made grown men cry just from being in the same room as his entry. Pretty sure it violated several international treaties." The council was beginning to understand that they might have fundamentally misunderstood what constituted a challenging environment for humans. The fire trial, which had been designed to test the absolute limits of biological endurance, was apparently what humans considered a Tuesday. Dr. Vexhala consulted her tablet again, pseudopods trembling with what her species called academic excitement, but which looked suspiciously like terror. "According to my research, humans regularly consume substances that would be classified as chemical weapons by 17 different galactic conventions. Oh yeah, capsaicin's wild stuff, Marcus agreed cheerfully. Wait until you hear about our recreational alcohol consumption, or our sports. Did I mention we invented something called hockey, where people strap knives to their feet and chase a rubber disc around on frozen water while hitting each other with sticks? Supreme Chancellor Vorgok, whose intimidating presence was beginning to feel less intimidating by the minute, decided to press forward before learning any more disturbing facts about human recreational activities. Enough! The trial begins now. The massive doors of the fire trial chamber slowly ground open, revealing an interior that glowed with heat shimmer. The plasma flames that lined the walls burned with colors that didn't have names in most languages, and the temperature readings made several species' instruments spontaneously combust. Marcus peered inside with professional interest. Oh, that's beautiful work. Really nice even heat distribution. Though I think you might have a small leak in your containment system, third panel from the left. See how that flame's dancing differently? Before anyone could respond, he walked into the chamber like he was entering his garage workshop. The doors slammed shut behind him with a finality that had echoed through the nightmares of failed champions for millennia. The council gathered around the viewing screens, which showed the interior of the chamber through specially designed quantum cameras that could function in the extreme environment. They watched in fascination as Marcus set up what appeared to be a camping expedition. First, he deployed the portable fans, creating air circulation patterns that actually improved the chamber's efficiency. Then, he hung the lantern wire, stringing lights that turned the hellish interior into something that looked almost cozy. Finally, he unpacked the meat and began arranging it on improvised smoking racks. Is he decorating? Whispered Ambassador Quirith. I believe he's creating what humans call ambiance. Dr. Vexhala replied, frantically taking notes. Within 30 minutes, the most feared trial in galactic history had been transformed into what appeared to be an outdoor barbecue venue. Marcus had even set up a small folding table and was reading what looked like a magazine while monitoring his smoking meat. The intercom crackled to life. Hey, can you guys hear me out there? Because I gotta say, this is working out great. The brisket's coming along nicely, and I think the ribs will be ready in about 6 hours. Oh, and I fixed that containment leak. Just needed a small adjustment to the plasma flow regulator. Zelthok stared at the screens in disbelief. He fixed our containment system? From the inside, Admiral Kickstar added helpfully, while it was actively trying to kill him. And he's cooking, Supreme Chancellor Vorgok said faintly. The trial specifically states that a champion must survive for 24 hours, Dr. Vexhala read from the ancient rules. At this rate, he's going to emerge well-rested and well-fed. As if to prove her point, Marcus's voice came over the intercom again. Hey, I know this is supposed to be a trial and all, but if anyone wants to join me for dinner, I've got way more food here than I can eat alone. Just saying, this brisket is going to be amazing. The council faced a crisis that none of their centuries of careful planning had prepared them for. The fire trial was supposed to be a test of worthiness to join the Galactic Council, a demonstration that a species possessed the strength and determination to face the universe's greatest challenges. Instead, they were watching a human turn their most sacred trial into a dinner party. Ambassador Quirith was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Should we take him up on the dinner offer? Absolutely not, Vorgok thundered. It would be completely inappropriate to join a trial candidate inside the sacred chamber for a casual meal. But, Zelthok said slowly, the regulations don't specifically forbid it. And, Dr. Vexhala added, from a research perspective, observing human food preparation techniques could provide valuable cultural insights. Plus, Admiral Kickstar chimed in, my species hasn't had a proper meal in 3 cycles, and whatever he's cooking smells incredible even through the environmental filters. They all looked at the screens again. Marcus had somehow procured a folding chair and was reading what appeared to be a technical manual while occasionally checking on his cooking. The interior of the chamber, which had been designed to evoke the mouth of hell, now looked like the world's most extreme backyard barbecue. This is highly irregular, Vorgak muttered, but his resistance was weakening. The smell of smoked meat was beginning to penetrate even the council chamber's advanced air filtration systems. The deciding factor came when Marcus's voice emerged from the intercom again, this time singing what he called a little ditty while he worked. The song was something about friends gathering around a fire and sharing food, and despite being performed by a being who was casually surviving in temperatures that would vaporize most of the council, it was oddly comforting. Motion to temporarily suspend trial protocols in the interest of diplomatic relations, Zelthok announced suddenly. Seconded, said Dr. Vexhala. Thirded, added Admiral Kickstar. Vorgak looked around at his fellow council members, realized he was outnumbered, and sighed a sigh that carried the weight of centuries of carefully maintained dignity. Fine, but we maintain official decorum. This is a diplomatic dinner, not a party. 20 minutes later, the fire trial chamber had been converted into the galaxy's most exclusive restaurant. The council members entered wearing their own heat-resistant suits, looking like the universe's most overdressed barbecue guests. Marcus greeted them with the enthusiasm of a man who had found new friends rather than faced his greatest challenge. Malnak, welcome. Glad you could make it. I've got brisket, ribs, some pulled pork, and I tried smoking some of those crystalline fruit things from the welcome basket. Not sure how they'll turn out, but hey, experimentation is the spice of life, right? The meal that followed would later be recorded in galactic history as the Treaty of Smoked Meats, though the official records carefully omitted the part where Supreme Chancellor Vorgak was seen doing what humans call the happy dance after trying Marcus's barbecue sauce. Dr. Vexhala, whose species had survived on nutrient paste for the past 1,000 years, experienced what she later described as a religious awakening upon tasting properly smoked brisket. She spent the entire dinner asking detailed questions about seasoning, temperature control, and smoking wood selection while taking extensive notes. Admiral Kickstar discovered that human food could be enjoyed even by beings who normally survived on cosmic radiation, and immediately began drafting trade agreements to import Earth spices to his home system. Ambassador Quirith found that his melodious tentacles were perfectly designed for handling barbecue utensils, and spent most of the evening harmonizing with Marcus's cooking songs. Even Zelthok, whose species had evolved beyond the need for traditional food, found himself inexplicably drawn to the social ritual of sharing a meal. His bioluminescent forehead displayed patterns that roughly translated to contentment and mild bewilderment at how pleasant this is. As the hours passed, what had started as a formal diplomatic dinner evolved into something resembling a family gathering. Stories were shared, cultural differences were discovered and celebrated, and everyone learned that the universal constant of good food making everything better applied even in temperatures hot enough to melt most known substances. So, let me get this straight. Marcus said around hour 18 of what was supposed to be his deadly trial. Your species has been eating nutrient paste for 1,000 years because you thought flavor was inefficient? It seemed logical at the time, Dr. Vexhala admitted, tentatively trying another bite of pulled pork. But I'm beginning to see flaws in our reasoning. And your people. Marcus turned to Admiral Kickstar. have never experienced spice because you assumed anything that caused physical sensation was dangerous? We are a cautious species, the Admiral replied, though he was currently on his third helping of what Marcus called mild chili, though perhaps overly so. Marcus shook his head in amazement. No wonder you all think this trial is impossible. You've never experienced the joy of deliberately subjecting yourselves to controlled discomfort for the sake of a greater reward. That's like half of human recreation right there. What's the other half? Zelthok asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Complaining about the controlled discomfort while planning to do it again next weekend, Marcus replied cheerfully. As the 24-hour mark approached, the council faced another unprecedented situation. Technically, Marcus had passed the fire trial. Not only had he survived, but he had thrived, created a social gathering, fixed their equipment, and introduced them to concepts their civilizations had never imagined. More importantly, they didn't want him to leave. Human Marcus, Zelthok began formally, though it was difficult to maintain dignity, while wearing a heat suit covered in barbecue sauce stains. By completing the fire trial, you have earned your species the right to join the Galactic Council. Cool, Marcus replied, checking his watch. Do I get a certificate or something? However, Vorgok continued, we would like to propose an additional arrangement. Would you be willing to serve as the Council's cultural integration specialist? Marcus paused in his cleaning of the barbecue equipment. What would that involve? Helping other species understand human approaches to problem solving, Dr. Vexhala explained. And perhaps occasionally preparing meals for diplomatic functions? Oh, and teaching us about recreational activities that involve controlled danger, Admiral Kickstar added hopefully. I've become very interested in this hockey concept. Marcus grinned. You know what? That sounds like fun, but I'm going to need a proper kitchen setup, and maybe a hockey rink. Oh, and we should probably start with something safer than hockey. Maybe dodgeball first. The collective shudder that ran through the council suggested that humanity's integration into galactic society was going to be an adventure for everyone involved. As they prepared to leave the fire trial chamber, now forever changed from a place of dread into something resembling a fond memory, Ambassador Quirith asked the question that had been bothering him all evening. Marcus, may I ask why you brought all this equipment? Did you know the trial would be survivable with the right preparation? Marcus shrugged as he packed up his gear with practiced efficiency. Not really. But my dad always taught me that if you're going to do something challenging, you might as well enjoy it. Plus, I figured if I was going to die horribly, at least I'd die eating good food. He paused thoughtfully. Though, honestly, 800 Celsius isn't that bad once you get used to it. My aunt's sauna in Finland gets pretty close to that. The council exchanged glances one more time. In the distance, they could hear what sounded suspiciously like several species simultaneously updating their intelligence files on humanity to include the notation, approach with caution, but bring snacks. As they left the chamber, the lights Marcus had strung up continued to glow warmly, and the improved air circulation system hummed efficiently. The most feared trial in galactic history had been permanently transformed into something that felt, against all odds, welcoming. Supreme Chancellor Vorgok made a note in his personal log. Consider redesigning all trials to include catering options. Also, immediately begin defensive preparations for when humans discover our other trials. If they react to the fire trial by having a barbecue, what will they do to the trial of endless void? He paused and added, on second thought, Don't tell them about the other trials until we're ready. And stock up on antacids. Behind them, the fire trial chamber stood ready for its next challenger, though it would never again be quite the same. The plasma flame still burned with stellar intensity. The temperature still reached levels that would vaporize most organic matter. And the challenge remained as technically difficult as ever. The only difference was that now, instead of evoking terror, it smelled faintly of barbecue smoke and possibility. And in a small corner of the chamber, barely visible unless you knew where to look, Marcus had left a tiny sign that read, "Thanks for the great cookout. MC, Cultural Integration Specialist, Earth." The human had turned the galaxy's most impossible trial into a dinner party, fixed their equipment, and somehow made friends with beings who had spent millennia cultivating an aura of cosmic intimidation. It was, the Council had to admit, probably the most human thing imaginable, which made them very curious and slightly terrified about what other impossible things humans might consider pretty doable with the right attitude and proper preparation. But that, as Marcus might say, was a problem for future them to worry about. For now, they had a new member species to integrate, a cultural specialist to train, and apparently, a hockey rink to construct. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to become a much more interesting place.